All right. So, I remember the first time I met Charles Poliquin. He was attending one of my seminars in Colorado. And, he was just kind of drilling me. And I thought, man, who is this beast? Because his arms were just big and he was very, very blunt and brunt. And "Oh, what do you know about this? And what do you know about that?" And, after that, he says, "You know what, I want to pick your brain." And then ultimately we had a few conversations. He says, "I want you to teach my trainers sports nutrition." And we had really good synergy. Charles was a phenomenal promoter. He was a great teacher. His claim to fame, he called himself the most successful strength and conditioning coach ever. Trained Olympians that had won Olympic medals in 17 different sports. So he clearly knew what he was doing. And originally called it biosignature. I think he lost the right to call it that when he went through a divorce. And then what did he call it after that?
The final iteration was metabolic analytics.
Metabolic analytics. And what was it between biosignature and metabolic analytics?
Bioprint.
Bioprint. Okay. So yeah, it was fascinating when I started studying his data. I said, "Charles, you've really got something here." And the first time he had me teach how we could do lifestyle intervention and nutrition intervention, I was pretty amazed at how the literature really supported what he was saying. But this is how I would start out. If you look at someone who has diabetes or depression or immune suppression or high blood pressure or cancer or obesity or distress or atherosclerosis, what do all of the conditions have in common? And you might have a hard time figuring out what that would be, except to say maybe these people aren't very healthy, but they all have exactly the same pattern, not the same degree, but the same pattern of endocrine imbalance. So this was the second annual Monaco Anti-Aging Conference, and they looked at these metabolic disturbances and diseases of aging, and what you're going to find out is with obesity, with diabetes, with high blood pressure, with atherosclerosis, with depression, with cancer, with stress, with immunocompromise, and overall aging, you see the pattern is elevated cortisol, decreased DHEA, decreased growth hormone, increased insulin resistance, increased glucose, increased cholesterol, triglycerides, increased thrombogenesis, decreased thyroid function, decreased melatonin, decreased immune function. Across the board, you find those things to be true. So that is profoundly insightful to me. So I'd ask people, if we look at these conditions on the left, obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, atherosclerosis, depression, cancer, stress, immunosuppression, menopause, aging, pregnancy, which of those is easiest to detect? And the answer is obesity, right? Now you might say, well, wait a minute, pregnancy? Well, no, what if they're 2 weeks pregnant? You don't know that. So aging, well, people age very, very differently, but obesity, you can see it, you can measure it, it's very, very clear. So now my next question is, which hormone is most controlled by lifestyle? We've got cortisol, DHEA, GH, growth hormone, insulin, thyroid, etc. Which of those is most controlled by lifestyle? Insulin. Insulin is what I'll go with. Sometimes will say, cortisol. If a lion jumps in this room, we're probably all going to have a cortisol release. So when things take us by surprise, we don't really regulate that as effectively. So powerful statement. We know that men and women do not store fat the same. So simple statement, regional fat distribution is under endocrine control. So this will go back to his original sites. He's added 2 since then, but he has a site for cortisol, 2 sites for insulin, 2 sites for estrogen, 2 sites for testosterone, 2 sites for growth hormone, and 1 site for thyroid. So we'll start with cortisol. So you've seen this in the other presentations. When the body is at rest, the liver gets the most blood flow, the kidney gets the second, the brain gets the third. When the body gets in fight or flight, those are all going to give up some of their oxygen and nutrients to give it to the muscles to fight or flee. So I often ask the question, who pays for fight or flight? And the answer is everybody, but especially in terms of detoxification is going to be decreased and brain function is going to be decreased. So because I like to put things together, when your body is really, really stressed, you're going to release some cortisol. Cortisol opposes the action of insulin. By the way, so do all the stress hormones. Epinephrine, norepinephrine oppose insulin. So does glucagon and growth hormone. But as you start to develop insulin resistance, you decrease your ability to burn fat, and that's going to put more fat on your body. But insulin also decreases sex hormone binding globule, and that's going to increase the amount of free estrogens in the system, which will bind up thyroid hormone. That'll decrease thyroid action, decrease mitochondrial function, decrease fat burning, and increase obesity. When you have excess cortisol and the catecholamines are detoxified by catecholomethyltransferase. Cortisol phase 2 liver detoxification also uses methyls. If you deplete methyls, that's associated with depression. Depression is a drive to ingest carbohydrates. They've proven that years ago. Carbohydrates are pleasure foods. They increase serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, etc. But if you do too many carbohydrates for too long, you actually have decreased pleasure perception, and it takes more carbohydrate to get the job done. And that again will raise insulin, decrease fat burning, increase obesity. Cortisol puts the brakes on an enzyme called 5' deiodinase. That's what converts T4 to T3. It's also what breaks down reverse T3. When you have decreased thyroid action, there's decreased mitochondrial action, decreased fat burning, increased probability of obesity. Cortisol has a propensity to put weight in the abdomen. And when you become more fat centrally, that is more pro-inflammatory tissue. As you increase interleukin-6, that is going to put the brakes on the cysticonitase enzyme in the mitochondria. Again, decreased fat burning, increased probability of obesity. The first adrenal steroid that drops is DHEA. DHEA is a peroxisome proliferated activated receptor agonist, and it actually helps with fat burning, but with less DHEA, there is less fat burning, more probability of obesity. Finally, cortisol is a glucocorticoid. It breaks down lean to free up amino acids to make sugar to fight or flee. And as we break down muscle, 50 to 90% of the calories are burned. Even when we sleep, we burn by muscle. Less metabolically active tissue, decreased fat burning, increased probability of obesity. So the simple summary is when you run a lot of stress for too long, you lose muscle, you gain fat. And the data is clear, cortisol increases abdominal obesity. So what do? I like melatonin. Remember, the gut makes 400 times the melatonin as the brain. Melatonin binds to the ACTH receptor on the adrenal cortex, and it buffers the central nervous system drive on stress. I do a lot of melatonin these days. This was an article talking about the 10 hallmarks of cancer. Melatonin is a positive modulator of all 10 of the hallmarks of cancer. Melatonin has no known toxicity. So when we're giving a couple milligrams every waking hour for 7 to 10 days, what does it do? It puts the brakes on stress, is a mitochondrial specific antioxidant, anti-cancer by many mechanisms. This is a very good clinical intervention. Theanine, an amino acid found in green tea, promotes relaxation without promoting drowsiness. And there are a lot of studies on the anti-cancer benefits of green tea as well. Theanine is even good for patients that are going through chemotherapy. So we like theanine, which is a known GABA facilitator. And then Ganoderma calms the body, the mind, and yeah, the medical literature says the spirit as well. It's called the herb of immortality. It also has the benefits of being anti-inflammatory by at least 13 different mechanisms, by alkalizing the system, by facilitating detoxification, by increasing nitric oxide, by having all the fabulous 50, all the vitamins, minerals, amino acids, proteins, carbohydrates, fat, fiber, and water at a dose to make a difference to human health. Has 79 unique molecules that are antimicrobial, anti-yeast, anti-parasite, anti-fungus, antibacterial, anti-cancer, can even block replication of the HIV virus, proven to kill methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, and can eradicate herpes. And that's part of the reason why I put every patient on it, and it's part of our stress reset. Now we'll go to insulin, and we did spend quite a bit of time talking about insulin. So the suprailiac and the subscapular regions are the areas that they're going to look at. And as Poliquin said, when it's suprailiac, he felt that that was more of an insulin challenge. When it was higher up, subscapular, he felt that that was carbohydrate intolerance. So diabetes, the world's biggest problem, like $1 in every $7 in our sick care system is spent there. And because I like to put it all together, when we ingest excessive amounts of refined carbohydrates or artificial sweeteners, we're going to increase our plasma glucose. As that elevates, there's going to be downregulation of the insulin receptors in response to the early insulin excess. We know that insulin resistance is a big problem in our entire society, and diabetes, the number 6 cause of death, costing directly $327 billion a year, US alone. As they ingest the extra carbohydrates, become insulin resistant. Remember, insulin says store fat, don't break down fat. That leads to obesity. Obesity is a risk factor for early death. It's also a risk factor for about every condition. It's the number 2 risk factor for cancer, risk factor for heart attack, stroke, etc. As people gain weight, they actually, if they do it with carbohydrates, they downregulate their brain chemistry, and they actually require more carbohydrate to get the kick that they were getting of it, the boost of pleasure. So when they downregulate their brain chemistry, they have depression. Insulin resistance is pro-inflammatory by at least 5 different mechanisms. That burns out nitric oxide. That leads to fatigue. So we see this weight gain, depression, fatigue, weight gain, depression, fatigue in there. We know that people ingest carbohydrates to increase serotonin and beta endorphin as part of a self-medicating mechanism. Ultimately, they downregulate these. They become progressively carbohydrate hungry. They gain weight, and that increases the risk for early death. Insulin puts the brakes on sex hormone binding globulin. That increases free estrogen. That increases thyroid hormone binding globulin. That decreases thyroid action. That increases the probability of obesity. When they're insulin resistant, insulin acts on 2 ovarian enzymes, 17-alpha hydroxylase, 1720 lyase. That leads to cysts on the ovaries and hyperandrogens within the female. Glucose itself has a challenge of causing oxidation and inflammation. You have inflammation and oxidation, and that acting on the blood vessels. Couple that with obesity, higher blood pressure, you increase the probability of heart attack and stroke. Insulin causes increased sodium reabsorption from the distal tubules of the kidneys. That leads to higher risk of high blood pressure. Again, that increases the risk of heart attack and stroke. Insulin also impairs the ability of the body to process uric acid. So with uric acid elevation, gout can settle in, and a number of things that are problematic can happen. So what happens when we become insulin resistant? You can have fatty liver, heart attack, stroke, neuropathy, high blood pressure, dementia, depression, retinopathy, obesity, inflammation, infertility, immune dysfunction, preeclampsia, gout, sexual dysfunction, and cancer. So we have a phrase: friends do not let friends become diabetic. Diana Schwartzbein wrote the book, The Schwartzbein Principle. She didn't realize that people buy titles, not content. She could have called it Eat Your Way to a Sexy Body and Enjoy Every Bite. That probably would have sold more. But she was an endocrinologist out of Southern California. She had a bunch of engineers as patients, and they would bring in their data. They'd measure their sugar after every meal. And they said, look, when I eat like the American Diabetic Association diet, my sugars actually go up. I get worse on their diet. What the heck is going on here? Well, they found out that keto was the way to go, intermittent fasting was the way to go, calorie restriction was the way to go. But here's the progression of insulin resistance. First, insulin levels rise after a meal, and then basically they stay high all the time. Remember, insulin says store fat, don't break down fat, so body fat rises next. The third thing that rises is blood fat, elevated total cholesterol, decreased HDL, increased LDL, increased triglycerides. The fourth thing that rises is sugar. So here's the point. If sugar is elevated, you missed all of the early indicators. And by the way, different ethnicities will store fat at different levels. It seems that the Asians don't have much of a propensity, most of them, to store fat, and they become diabetic earlier without becoming so big. So know that there are differences in ethnicity. Not sure why that doesn't want to go forward. There we go. So the Newsweek cover story, when fat attacks. So these adipocytokines are pro-inflammatory, pro-oxidizing. They oppose insulin. They potentiate cortisol. They dysregulate immunity. They dysregulate appetite, and they contribute to morbidity and mortality. And I always liked comparing these two pictures and then asking these questions. So there's Gwyneth Paltrow as she is. There she is in the right on a fat suit in the movie Shallow Hal. We asked the question, who handles stress better? Whose brain works better? Whose heart works better? Whose kidneys work better? Whose immune system works better? Whose pancreas works better? Whose liver works better? Who has a better love life? Who has better fertility? Who has more joie de vivre, the joy of life? Who's going to age faster? Who's going to die first? Who will have more fun at Disneyland? And then the magic question, what if the difference were only 10 pounds? All those factors would still be true. Friends do not let friends become obese. Friends do not let friends become diabetic. Friends don't let friends become insulin resistant. So we've got to get after that. It is the biggest problem in our sick care system. Did you want to take a picture of that? You do have the slides available to you. So where does the life pyramid come in, or the food pyramid? Again, nature's food. If God made it, it's okay. If man made it, stay away. Not too much, not too often, every color, every day, in a way that honors your physiology, your genetics, and your health goals. So, how many diabetics want to go on a keto diet? They are profoundly addicted to sugar. The answer is none of them. How long does it take to reset that? Lustig estimates 21 days. I showed that animation, or I think I did, right? Did I show the animation of the brain chemistry and the resetting of it? That might be worth doing. It might have been one of those where I had to convert it to a different kind of file. Let's see if I can do it. Life is definitely better switching to a Mac. That's my point. I used to get viruses all the time, but now I have files that I need to convert all the time. All right, I think I can do it. Let's see if I have it. My computer is really thinking hard about this, but there's a documentary called The Skinny on Obesity. Maybe I should go see if I find it on my YouTube. This is worth watching. That's why I'm going through the effort to try to find it. And that wasn't successful. Not sure what this is going to show, so I might have to jump ahead. There it is.
There's an area of the brain called the reward center. The scientific name is nucleus accumbens. And it is the site where dopamine works. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. And it conveys the feeling of pleasure. And pleasure, the lack of another word, is good. Except a lot of pleasure, as it turns out, is not. In the process of going for more pleasure, we have changed our dopamine system. And one of the keys to addiction is the idea that after stimulating that system chronically, again, it takes 3 weeks to do this. What happens is that the receptors to the dopamine signal now downregulate.
We know that the brains of people with obesity do respond differently to food. In that reward center, when they see palatable food, some parts of the brain light up a lot, that wanting part. But the liking part, once they taste the food, it's blunted. It's not that they're getting more pleasure or they're getting less. That's like living with an urge that you can't satisfy. And so people think that this hyper reward condition or this inability to experience the same level of reward from the same foods that other people are getting is causing people to overeat in order to get that dopamine that they're missing.
You have to eat more to get the same effect. And that phenomenon is called tolerance. And then we pull the chemical causing pleasure away. Now there's no dopamine and fewer receptors. And that gives you symptoms of withdrawal. So tolerance and withdrawal are the hallmarks of addiction. We know that this occurs with nicotine. That's why we have tobacco addiction. We know this occurs with alcohol. We know this occurs with cocaine, morphine, cannabis. It occurs with every single drug that we use. And it occurs with sugar. And that's relatively new data that has come out in, say, the last 5 years, which shows that sugar specifically downregulates the same factors, same factors in that nucleus accumbens, in the reward center, as does all of these other addictive abusive compounds.
Addiction is a strong word, but it might be a really helpful word to push us to recognize the power of certain food on you. There is some evidence that becoming obese does change and blunt that reward system. So we do know that overexposure to McDonald's can cause brain changes. So food can be just like a drug to certain people who have certain dispositions addictions. Is it that becoming obese has changed the brain chemistry, or is it that it rewards this predisposition that caused them to become obese? It's very likely that it's a little each.
No one chooses obesity. Chooses. You think anyone looks out and says, you know, I think I'll go out and be obese today. There is physiology, there's biochemistry underlying every single thing. Sleeping.
So definitely a good documentary, Skinny on Obesity. But here's the rule. Friends do not let friends become fat, become insulin resistant, become diabetic. And probably later on, he said it took 3 weeks for that downregulation to occur, but it also takes 3 weeks to recover. So you try to get a sugar addict 3 weeks without sugar, and that can be problematic. And here's the problem. A single dose brings them right back to where they were. So you got to get those 3 weeks. I would almost like to see them have some kind of inpatient programs to help people through that, because And again, I mentioned I had a patient that's had a pretty challenging life in this last week. She was binging on sugar. And I told her 94% of rats prefer processed sugar to cocaine. And she said, well, yeah, that's me. So she had a harsh drug background as well and definitely preferred sugar to cocaine. So when we start looking at estrogen, that toxicity applies to both men and women. So there was a time, right, where men were men and little girls grew slowly, and it wasn't really that long ago. You look at the data from France, age of first menstruation, and it was about 15 years old in the mid-1860s. By this graph, it got down somewhere to about 12 and a half. Then in the US, it's something like 11.2. Time magazine cover story, is it hormones? It is. Is it fat? It is. Is it something in the water? Yeah, it's estrogens and xenoestrogens in the water. How are parents coping with it? Not very well. So when these little girls are growing up fast, the body's changing. That's increased lifetime exposure of estrogen, increased probability of breast cancer, increased probability of teen pregnancy, other challenges like that. And again, regional fat distribution is clearly regulated by hormones. So the Time magazine cover, estrogen, every woman's dilemma. Remember, estrogens, whether you make them, whether you take them, whether you're knowingly or unknowingly intoxicated by them, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, you need to get rid of them every day in a healthy way. 11 different liver cytochromes start the process of estrogen clearing. Cytochrome P450-1A2, which is stimulated by cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. Some companies use indole-3 carbinol. Some companies use diindolylmethane. Those will drive cytochrome P450-1A2. By the way, when I showed the BRCA data, coffee and caffeine also drives cytochrome P450-1A2. And that's why women with BRCA that drink 6 cups of coffee a day have 69% less onset of breast cancer. Cytochrome P450-1B1 is called the mutagenic estrogen. 1E1 is called the mitogenic estrogen. Those are in human physiology for a reason. We just don't want them to be dominant. And phase 2 of liver detoxification is glucuronidation, sulfation, methylation. So when we use functional foods for estrogen clearance, we support cytochrome P450-1A2, and we support phase 2 of liver detoxification, and it's proven to clear these estrogens from the system more effectively. So you're going to make more estrogens if you have extra body fat. If you're taking the birth control pill, remember ethinyl estradiol is 100 times stronger than human estrogen, and unknowingly intoxicated by them estrogens and plastics, pesticides injected into animals. So detoxification is complex. It requires energy, it requires nutrition, it requires protein, and it is, remember, our body's top priority at rest. So when in doubt, detox is one of my rules. And we keep coming back to the nutrition pyramid again, and then ultimately the life pyramid. So if you're going to eat nature's foods, organic is good, so you're not getting the xenoestrogens. Cruciferous vegetables are good. Use your blend of superfoods. There's functional foods that clear estrogens and metalloestrogens more effectively. Then we round out the pyramid with multi-activated omega-3s, probiotics, D3, K2. Testosterone. And so we have a pandemic of plenty of men with relatively low testosterone, and it's going to be somewhat the same factors. Obesity is going to increase aromatase. Aromatase converts testosterone to estrogen. That's not good for male health and or physiology. I think I showed some of the video on the disappearing male. This was a documentary. We have had males disappearing from the planet for a long, long time. This is New England Journal of Medicine, Journal of the American Medical Association. Since 1950, there's been significant declines in the proportions of males born. And what the data is showing is that these xenoestrogens are actually causing the male fetuses to abort early in pregnancy, sometimes even before the mom would even know that she's pregnant. When we start looking at estrogen target tissues, men need estrogen too. Their brain needs it, their heart needs it. Men do have mammary glands, and sadly, a lot of men are growing those. It's important for the liver. The reproductive tract also has estrogen receptors, and bone has estrogen receptors. Androgens increase muscle mass, and so we want some androgens for that, but they also decrease body fat. So that's why a lot of people are saying, hey, we should give people androgens, but I'll say androgens, whether you make them, whether you take them, you need to get rid of them every day in a healthy way. So lots of benefits of testosterone, but this was a New England Journal of Medicine study when they were giving men testosterone supplementation, higher rates of cardiac, respiratory, and dermatologic events. Remember that it's going to increase hemoglobin, it's going to increase hematocrit, it's going to increase erythropoietin, and if the individual is inflamed, that can be an increased risk of a cardiovascular event. And then Poliquin's quote, it's criminal to put a guy on testosterone when he's fat because he will turn it into estrogen. So this was an international obesity article way back when, but they were talking about a guy that was morbidly obese. They said during 20 years of marriage, he had no normal sexual intercourse. The marked obesity produced a significant increase in estrogens, which subsequently induced a severe decrease in testosterone. And if you look up that article and read it, they said the guy's testicles were about the size of peas. They had withered away to nothing. And you know, nobody, as Lustig said in that video, no one sets out to be obese. Kramer on Seinfeld came up with the man Zier because so many men are walking around with man boobs. And regional fat distribution is clearly regulated by hormones, and a dairy farmer with the world's biggest man boobs. I've seen plenty of those in clinical practice. It's sad. I mean, you almost think these guys need a mastectomy to correct it. When estrogen is high in the system, it's going to feed back on gonadotropin-releasing hormone. That will decrease luteinizing hormone, which in the male makes testosterone. It'll decrease follicle-stimulating hormone, which is going to increase sperm. And therefore, male infertility can happen with estrogen toxicity. And the same is true of the xenoestrogens. They now know that bisphenol A feeds back in the same way. Estrogen accumulates in the prostate as time goes on, and this study says that estrogen is a player in about half of male prostate cancers. I think it might even be more than that. So estrogen detox is what we do for a lot of our men with prostate cancer, and they get really wonderful results. So again, it comes back to it, right? The nature's foods, same thing, cruciferous vegetables, keto, every color, every day, not too much, not too often, in a way that honors your physiology, your genetics, and your health goal. Superfoods, functional foods for estrogen clearance, metal clearance, dot the I's, cross the T's with a multi, activated omega-3s, probiotics, a combination of D3, K2. I see you're making a few notes there. Any questions about any of that so far? It's kind of rapid fire because it's somewhat of a review of the whole course, but here's the thing that I find fascinating. If you can do a good physical exam, you get a lot of insight as to what's happening inside that patient. And if that gives you enough leverage to get the person on a program, go for it. So now we're going to go with growth hormone. That's, yeah.
It seems like a lot of people can have all of these, right?
They can.
Insulin and estrogen are all going to move in the same way. Testosterone will be down, growth hormone will be down.
They all have the same pattern of endocrine imbalance. So what Poliquin has suggested is when you do the skin fold evaluation, when you're looking at where's the highest level of fat, you pick the worst points and you start there. Pick the worst and start there. So this was a guy that said, hey, you know, I started doing growth hormone and look at what happened to me. I mean, that's a real nice before and after, but I'm thinking he got a personal trainer. I'm thinking he got a chef. I'm thinking there was some mega financial incentive for him to do that. You know, I think that's actually deceptive advertising. You tell the, you know, obese, out of shape 60-year-old, start doing growth hormone and you're gonna become a senior model. Probably not the case. But when we start looking at regional fat distribution being regulated by hormones, we know that there can be a decline in growth hormone secretion, especially with body fat increasing. So at one point, my Olympic coach wanted to have all his athletes tested for IGF-1. That's the liver's activation of growth hormone, easier to measure. He wanted to see where they were. And I found it fascinating. My IGF-1 measured higher than I think every one of the Olympians that had it tested. And that was good incentive for them to get on a better diet, a better sleep schedule, to recover more, everything else. But we have plenty of people that can maintain real good body composition, real good endocrine levels, but they eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right, etc. Exercise, especially intense physical exercise, will increase growth hormone and IGF-1. And it's known that endurance training is going to decrease growth hormone. So, you know, I still remember one of my best, trainers said, look, extra body mass is to your advantage if you want to move something. It works against you if you want to move you. So you think about football, the linemen are big, 300 pounds. The wide receivers, they're 100 pounds lighter than that. The defensive backs, 100 pounds lighter than that because they have to move a lot faster. And extra weight can be a detriment. But if you're running 26 miles, you definitely don't want to carry anything extra. So they will have a decrease in the level of growth hormone. So growth hormone acts directly on fat cells, and then IGF-1 acts on muscle. So a lot of benefit there. A lot of the benefits of growth hormone are due to IGF-1. And that makes for stronger connective tissue as well. So what are the best ways to enhance growth hormone? Intense physical exercise and deep sleep. So I think I did a section on sleep, at least a brief section. You look at Anders Ericsson's book, Peak, the best of the best, sleep 8.6 hours a night. Tom Brady is meticulous about his sleep. LeBron James, meticulous about his sleep. Michael Phelps was very serious about his sleep, and he would take a 2 to 3 hour nap in the afternoon. When you use your body more, you've got to recover your body more. Arginine can be a secretagogue for growth hormone, but it's not going to do anything like intense physical exercise or sleep. One thing that I found well is the sleep window. I think I mentioned last time, when I would teach a 48-hour series, we would have people bring in, like this nutrition series, we'd have people bring in actual patients. Now, the reason we didn't do some of that stuff this time is the IAACN hired me to teach modules 1 and 2, and they packed it with so much information. There was almost like no free time at all extra. But when I would teach it in the past, we'd have people bring in, submit case studies. We'd work them up in the class. We'd put them on a nutrition program. We'd follow them through the series. And there was a woman that had chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, multiple chemical sensitivity, all kinds of major problems. And she says, I only sleep a few hours a night. I said, you got to be kidding me. She says, no, that's all I sleep, just a few hours a night. I said, how long has that been going on? She said, 20 years. And I said, that sounds impossible. So I said, and I think her number was 3 hours. I said, okay, if you only sleep 3 hours a night, that's all we're going to give you tonight. And she looked at me strange. I said, okay, so, let's say we have you go to bed at midnight, not a minute earlier, set your alarm, get up at 3 o'clock, not a minute later. You need to stay up all the next day. You can't take any stimulants. And if you want to expand your sleep window, you can the next night. Well, just a few days of forcing her down to 3 hours of sleep, she was sleeping 8 hours a night by the end of the week. So, when you literally tell people, this is your sleep window, the body will adapt to sleep in it. We also did melatonin, theanine, Ganoderma, things like that to calm them down. Poliquin's quote on sleep, nothing gets you more bang for your buck than sleep. And I think he's right. This was a study on athletes, and this was, I believe, the Stanford tennis team. They had them lay in bed just a couple extra hours a day. They said, whether you sleep or not, keep a dark room, keep it cool, keep it quiet, you got to stay in bed. and they improved their serve efficiency 17% on their first serve in just a few weeks. So absolutely powerful there. And again, we go with our food pyramid, our life pyramid, and everything else. The last thing is going to be thyroid. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about thyroid this week. That one is basically going to be the point where a woman's bra would be. And this is a quote that I found pretty powerful. Various processes influence the action of thyroid hormones in different tissue independent of the serum thyroid hormone levels. So pH has to be right. Oxidation reduction potential has to be right. The cell receptor has to be right. The membrane has to be flexible. And you'll see a lot of people that have that extra fat there. That is the sign of the hypothyroid. And we talked about how autoimmune thyroid, that'll be a test question, the most common cause of acquired hypothyroid. Your body just doesn't hate your immune system and try to attack it. Something has to go wrong. And how does autoimmune disease start? My simple answer is the conditions are just right. So if you have to recognize your cells as your own cells, and you don't recognize them because something's gone wrong with them, the immune system is doing its job to attack the cells that it doesn't recognize. And our bodies have literally over 100 autoantibodies, most of which don't cause a problem at all. So we've actually found that if people don't clear out dead and dying cells, they're more likely to develop cancer and degeneration. So the new paradigm is autoantibodies remove dead and dying cells, they prevent tumors, and they are protective. Now, if there's too many, it's because the body is literally too sick. I like this quote from Jeff Bland. He and I taught a series years ago about autoimmunity, and he's very clever about how he says things. He says, I previously thought that as we age, we become progressively allergic to ourselves. He said, I now realize that we become allergic to someone else. So now that might be hard for you to process a bit. I had to ask him for clarity. What happens is our cells are no longer recognized as our own. So the immune system says, hey, you don't belong here. I'm going to take you out. And autoantibodies do increase with age. We talked about the iodine patch test. We talked about fluorides, chlorides, bromides, and iodine. Epstein-Barr can increase autoimmunity. Epigenetics, drug-induced lupus, et cetera, et cetera. And how are we going to wrap this one up? Guess we'll just go. Estrogens promote autoimmunity, androgens protect against. Gluten can increase the risk of autoimmune thyroid. PCOS is associated with increased autoimmune thyroid. Leaky gut is associated with autoimmune thyroid. The autoimmunity can create a hyper or a hypothyroid. Heavy metals are associated with autoimmune thyroid. In fact, it's called the most environmentally sensitive organ. This was a study where people had their mercury amalgams removed and their autoantibodies normalized. And keep in mind, thyroid autoimmunity can be a cause of repetitive miscarriages and spontaneous abortion. So, what do we do for the thyroid? We eat real clean. We eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right. We detoxify. We clear heavy metals. We're gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, additive-free, preservative-free. We do the entire nutrition pyramid, and we do the universal immune modulators, which include vitamin D, DHEA, perilla, Ganoderma, activated omega-3s, and sealing and healing the gut. So any questions about the endocrine fat connection? Anything at all? Yep.
I want to hear about your DiMartini breakthrough experience.
Ha, okay. So I'll probably stop the recording on this section then.